Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and we're saying goodbye to 2010 with a special end-of-the-year edition of the Listening Post. It's our countdown of the news stories and personalities that made headlines, rode the airwaves.
Why has everyone pounced on Ahmadinejad?
And dominated the media this year.
Breaking news out of Haiti, the largest, most powerful earthquake.
We'll also get some of our regular Global Village voices to give us their list of this year's top news stories.
Every reporter and their mother flew down to Haiti to cover this story.
And
the media is led by the devil.
Some of our favorite viral videos that had people clicking in 2010.
Is that Julian Assange?
Yes, it is. Hello.
It's become something of an annual tradition here at the Listening Post to put a call through to the team at Influence Communication in Montreal, Canada. Influence is a firm that analyzes the media and throughout the year keeps a close eye on what's making news around the world. Their researchers track around 1 billion news items from newspapers and broadcast media in 160 countries. Measuring column inches and airtime, they work out the 15 news stories that have received the most coverage. And we find that their list makes for an interesting rundown of the big issues and events that got us all buying papers and tuning into the news. Sometimes the aftermath of a natural disaster can be as horrific as the disaster itself, and that was certainly true for post-earthquake Haiti, where the cholera outbreak attracted enough coverage to make it the 15th most covered news story of 2010. At number 14 was another natural occurrence, the devastating floods in Pakistan. But had you tuned into the news during the first week of the floods, there was not a hint that this disaster was as bad as it turned out to be.
And media coverage is a lifeline when it comes to crisis situations.
There was no let-up to the widespread flooding in Pakistan today.
Pakistan is a difficult story for the Western media to cover.
Already, media is talking about its favorite topic of Islamic extremism.
Terrorists could try to take advantage of a catastrophe.
What an event of this kind needs is somebody to sort of really light up the response.
In the week after the earthquake in Haiti, 41% of news stories in the U.S. were on that subject. In the first 2 weeks after the Pakistan floods, which affected millions more people, it never moved above the 3% figure.
For many, many generations to come, Pakistan is going to reel from the effects of this disaster. It is a huge story. It should have gained equal amount of media response, but it hasn't got that.
Part of the problem is that news, particularly television, is picture-driven. And relatively speaking, in terms of coverage, floods have an image problem.
There is a hierarchy of disasters. At the very top, you get things like tsunamis or earthquakes, disasters that bring us iconic images. Then lower down than that, you get floods.
Less coverage means less of a reaction on the part of the global news media. That adds up to less humanitarian aid for millions of Pakistanis who suffered when the waters rose and still suffer today. The story at number 13, a hangover from 2009, the post-election protests in Iran. The images from June 2009 have almost become a media shorthand for the country's political turmoil. The clampdown on the news media that came into force back then has worsened now. Into the top dozen stories of the year now, including 3 international sporting events. Number 12 is the Super Bowl, the American football game in Miami, Florida. At 10, the Commonwealth Games held in Delhi in India. And at number 9, the Vancouver Winter Olympics. Sandwiched in the middle of those was the war in Iraq at number 11. Now, back in 2007, the Iraq War was the most covered news story in the world. 3 years later, though, it has slipped down the news agenda, and we have a feeling that it would have fallen even further had it not been for a website known as WikiLeaks.
Come on, fire!
Hey, Roger.
Keep shooting.
These images from a U.S. Army helicopter of an attack in 2007 that killed 16 Iraqis were released by WikiLeaks, the online whistleblowing site. But in subsequent releases of classified material, WikiLeaks would no longer go it alone.
Online whistleblower WikiLeaks has struck Washington another massive blow.
This isn't so much a leak as a deluge of information.
Having collaborated in July on the Afghan war logs with print outlets from 3 countries, When it came to the Iraq war logs, WikiLeaks brought TV into the picture. SVT from Sweden, Channel 4 in Britain.
They're the secret files from the Iraq war.
And Al Jazeera.
They reveal the covering up of Iraqi state torture.
TV has a degree of emotional impact that you just don't get with newsprint. And I wondered if we couldn't actually combine these two types of impacts, the sort of detailed factual reporting that you get from newsprint, and then the emotionality and that sort of conviction that pictures are true, and pull both of these together.
Yet conspicuous by their absence from the WikiLeaks mix were American television news outlets.
US broadcasters just refused to come to a position where we could negotiate something useful.
And I think that's because the media is just simply unwilling to tell that narrative to the American people. It's a very uncomfortable narrative. It's one in which says the US has been complicit in war crimes and atrocities against innocent civilians, and who really wants to discuss that?
Iran makes an appearance on our list again. This time, it's the global media's fixation on the country's nuclear ambitions. That story is number 8.
Very controversial nuclear program.
The media's obsession with the nuclear question has been egged on by Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
I understand you are now saying your nuclear program is on the table.
The president's appearance at the United Nations in September gave the global media, especially North American outlets, a chance to put him on the spot. Most were hoping for what's known as a gotcha moment. But after 5 years of Ahmadinejad, what the media have failed to realize is that they may be playing into this politician's hands.
They tend to repeat questions. They tend to keep asking him, is he prepared to have talks with the West, for instance?
Are you going to have a meeting with the United States?
He said a million times that since the sanctions that he's quite keen to have talks. It's kind of a non-starter as a question.
Every time he appears on the CNN, PBS, other American networks, journalists ask him about nuclear issue, Holocaust denial, and asking Israel to be wiped off the map. I mean, those are legitimate issues, but he's been talking about those things for the past 5 years.
That Iran might be looking to reestablish some kind of direct negotiations over the nuclear program.
That's right. I think he is the distraction for the international media. He looks like the enemy, he acts like the enemy, his rhetoric is very combative. That's why the media, especially the mass media, loves him.
We're at the halfway mark now of our countdown of the top news stories of 2010. But the team at Influence Communication doesn't just rank news stories, it also tracks the people who drive the news agenda. And here are 10 people the media just couldn't get enough of. At number 10 was the Pope, who has had a relatively rough ride in the media following more stories critical of his handling of the child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church. Number 9 sees U.S. golfer Tiger Woods back in the news. He probably wishes the coverage was for his golf game rather than his now very public, private indiscretions. The first Politico to crack the top 10, Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi at number 8. Like Woods, the coverage of him in his day job was supplemented by stories of his personal extramarital tendencies. Number 7 was the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. His story was almost all political. His defeat at the hands of the British electorate and subsequent withdrawal from public life. Hillary Clinton, the U.S. Secretary of State, defeated presidential candidate and former First Lady, is pure media bait. She came in at number 6. A surprise number 5 was the Spanish Prime Minister, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. We didn't cover him on the Listening Post, but clearly somebody did, probably over Spain's struggling economy. Europe's economic travails would have featured largely in the coverage of the political leaders who came in at 4, 3, and 2 in the newsmakers list. Britain's newly elected David Cameron and Germany's Angela Merkel both had coalition governments. The media love to test the strength of coalitions by reporting on the cracks within political alliances. France's Nicolas Sarkozy is a perennial media magnet. He shuns the diplomatic approach and therefore attracts coverage. And for the third straight year, the number 1 public figure in coverage by the global media, Barack Obama. The nature of the coverage these days leading up to that midterm election shellacking is much less positive. But for sheer volume of coverage, nobody beats the President of the United States. We're back after the break with the rest of our countdown, as well as a top 5 news list generated by some of our Global Village voices. Welcome back to our end of the year big news countdown. We're just past the halfway mark. Haiti's already featured once on this list, and it comes in again at number 7 with the coverage of the earthquake that shattered the country at the beginning of the year.
Breaking news out of Haiti, the largest, most powerful earthquake in the region's history.
It's feared the number of people killed by the earthquake could now reach 200,000.
Of all the possible natural disasters, earthquakes are made for television. They play to the strengths of the medium.
There's very dramatic pictures, there's great suffering.
Without necessarily exposing television's weaknesses.
This woman lost 4 of her children.
There's a very easy idea of what's gone wrong and what needs to be done.
Thousands of people with nowhere to go.
Add to that, you have a state that has failed. It ticks all the boxes as far as news values go.
Media organizations devoted huge resources to the story. CNN had 15 correspondents there, backed up by 60 support staff. Remarkable, given how difficult Haiti was to reach. The country's infrastructure had been smashed, its air traffic control system crippled. Still, the world's media and aid agencies managed to get there.
This is a perpetual battle in disasters like the earthquake in Haiti. Who should be given the seat on the plane?
Aid agencies are very keen to have media teams report what they're doing, because after all, they depend on donations and the goodwill of governments to fund their operations. It's more a situation of one feeding off the other.
It's really a huge technical challenge.
But once teams of reporters had made it to Haiti, they then had to contend with the logistics of reporting the story.
I think the biggest challenge is simply that there's very, very few means of communication here. We can text one another to coordinate our movements, but we can't really get any other information, sources that most journalists are used to getting.
Despite those challenges, one of the ironies of the modern age is that the news media could get live satellite pictures out of Haiti long before clean drinking water was delivered to the people who needed it. Coverage of Europe's financial turmoil was the 6th biggest global news story of 2010.
Never before in its short life has the euro faced a crisis like the one it faces now.
Starting with the Greek debt crisis in April, the financial rot spread through the European Union, moving into Spain and onto Ireland. The news soon grew beyond the business pages and made its way to front pages around the world. At number 5, another crisis, global in scale but different in nature, climate change. Just 3 years ago, this story could not even crack the top 15. But extreme winters, overheated summers, turbulent weather patterns, and this year's Climate Change Summit in Cancun landed it at number 5. Coming in at number 4 was the World Cup of Football in South Africa.
The continent's biggest ever sporting event.
The tournament always makes news beyond the playing field, and the fact that it was held in an African country for the first time had news crews combing South Africa looking for stories. Either that, or they were just trying to get away from the blare of those vuvuzelas. Before we hit the big 3 news stories of the year, we thought we'd share the results of an experiment we conducted at the Listening Post's online laboratory. We took our 15 big news stories, shuffled them around, and then threw them at some of our Global Village Voice regulars. We wanted to see if their top news stories would match the results of the Influence Communication Survey. Here's what our Global Village Voices had to say.
Number 5 and 4 are about the revelations concerning the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. These are wars which may be disappearing in our minds, but new in-depth analysis and also the recent releases by WikiLeaks brought us much more information than we had before.
And the third important story of the year is the floods in Pakistan. We see how, despite the media coverage, why there was not as much response from the world as it should have been.
Number 3 is also a sad story, the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It's very hard to see something good about it, except that I guess for some people it made them rethink their oil consumption.
The consequences of the oil spill will continue to take place for years to come, but as soon as the incident itself, the leakage, has ended, the attention of the global media has shifted somewhere else.
The second biggest story of the year, I would say, would be the World Cup. The first African World Cup definitely got attention all over the globe.
Because we're sitting in Africa, this was a wonderful story for us, a great way to start
a new era in Africa and to give people a different impression about our continent.
The second one is the protests after the Iranian elections. For the first time, we saw social media like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube being used in such a powerful and such an organized way to pierce the official narrative.
Well, without doubt, the biggest story this year has been the earthquake in Haiti. With 230,000 people dying and around 1 million made homeless, this was one of the largest scale tragedies in living memory.
I mean, it just seemed like every reporter and their mother flew down to Haiti to cover this story. It was wall-to-wall coverage for 24 hours, leaving many people like myself wondering if there was anything else going on in the world.
We're down to the final three in our countdown of the most covered news stories of 2010. The war in Afghanistan is in its 10th year, but it's newsier now than at just about any time since it began back in late 2001. You can blame WikiLeaks for some of that. The U.S. government did after the whistleblowing site released more than 90,000 classified documents known as the Afghan war logs.
This massive leak provides incredible detail and insight into the U.S. war in Afghanistan.
Classified documents about the war in Afghanistan leaked and posted on the web.
The war logs made it clear the war wasn't going as well as advertised. The U.S. government then attacked The Messenger, WikiLeaks, and Julian Assange, and some media outlets joined in.
The danger is you pick so many powerful targets and you become a target yourself.
There was also the demise of Stanley McChrystal, the American military commander in Afghanistan. He was taken down by a journalist working for Rolling Stone, a countercultural magazine better known for music reviews than its political reporting.
America's top commander in Afghanistan and members of his staff went rogue in a Rolling Stone article.
In fly-on-the-wall journalism, you're there to capture exactly those kinds of moments.
The really important journalistic work that Michael Hastings did was that he, in a very textured way, an in-depth way, showed the real deep doubts that U.S. commanders have about the possibility of success in Afghanistan.
What Michael Hastings and Rolling Stone got with this piece that has turned the war upside down is a scoop.
It was an old-fashioned scoop. Cause for celebration among the U.S. journalistic community? Hardly.
Rolling Stone magazine usually get this kind of access.
It was crazy this guy had that much access.
How did this reporter get inside the inner circle of trust? And did he violate the trust?
The reason there seems to be such hostility is because there's a sense in the Washington media and the establishment press corps that if you have the choice to avoid embarrassing or otherwise harming somebody in power, that it's the responsibility of the reporter to think about how to protect the powerful.
It was a big news story that revealed much about the Afghan war and about the media that covered it. At number 2, the huge oil spill off the Gulf of Mexico. It was the worst environmental disaster in American history and a public relations calamity for BP and the industry it symbolically represented. The Deepwater Horizon disaster attracted coverage around the world, even though BP did its best to choke off the inevitable flow of bad news.
Massive oil spill in the Gulf, which is now 130 miles long, 70 miles wide.
First came the environmental damage.
The mess in the Gulf where oil has now been spewing into the water.
Then for BP, the public relations mess, much of it self-inflicted.
Does your company take 100% responsibility for this leak?
This is not our accident, but it's our responsibility to deal with it.
This is your worst nightmare, basically, if you're in public relations.
Unfortunately, Tony Hayward, his message has not matched with what's really happening. He's continually misspoke, everywhere from saying that the Gulf is a very large body of water and that this is not a big problem.
The overall environmental impacts of this will be very, very modest.
To all of a sudden saying,
no one who wants this thing over more than I do. You know, I'd like my life back.
The BP chairman's disastrous media performance was so poor, the company hired a high-profile Washington lobbying firm, Brunswick Group. But the bad PR kept coming when BP tried to keep reporters off the beaches and away from the oil slicks.
When we tried to reach the beach, seen here and covered in oil, a boat of BP contractors with 2 Coast Guard officers on board told us to turn around under threat of arrest.
This is BP, it's not ours.
The leak has been plugged, but the damage to the Gulf and BP's reputation, well, that's a different story. The #1 news story of 2010, according to Influence Communication, was really two stories in one. It combined the political resurrection of the American Republican Party through its midterm election gains and the global media's continuing obsession with Barack Obama.
Now, as promised, a special comment on the madness of the Tea Party and the elections of next Tuesday.
I think Barack Obama doesn't want America to succeed.
Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left were not the only media outlets with partisan stakes in the U.S. midterms. They were just the most obvious.
Rand Paul, Republican Tea Party candidate for Senate from Kentucky, today's worst person in the world.
Political partisanship is such an easy thing for these big media outlets because it's so cheap. They don't have to actually invest in real reporting. All you have to do is bring on, one side or the other and have them fight and argue with each other.
You can rant all you want, you're not going to shut me up.
And it fills time and it does well in the ratings.
However, not everyone in the media bought into that sort of political coverage. 2 days prior to the election, comedian Jon Stewart drew more than 200,000 people to Washington. His prime target was not the political establishment, it was the media, particularly 24-hour news channels. He called it the rally to restore sanity.
The country's 24-hour Politico pundit perpetual panic conflictinator did not cause our problems, but its existence makes solving them that much harder.
Stewart was exaggerating to make a point, just like the media do. And that's it, our list of the top news stories of 2010 in terms of coverage in the global media. Our thanks to Influence Communication of Montreal for doing the legwork with the data and allowing us to share the results of their work with you. We'll leave you now, as we always do on this program, with the free agents of the media world. This is a compilation of some of our favorite web videos, the ones that we end the show with. We'll see you next time at the Listening Post when we'll get started with our coverage of the news coverage and the media for the year 2011.
What's going on here?
I think you know.
Is that Julian Assange?
Yes, it is. Hello.
Look at his hair. Everyone knows it's white. This isn't Assange, it's some loser with lowlights.
This is all petty gossip. The media is led by the devil.
前几天，北韩领导人金正日的第三子金正银被晋升至4星军阶，更加接近成为金氏王朝的接班人。
I think it's time to end this session. It seems journalism's become a dangerous profession, risking ostracism, extradition to provide a clear picture of the world we live in.